Yesterday, Valve released a patch for DOTA Underlords. This was a balance update along with some other things that came with the patch, and I wanted to kind of talk about the changes. And just like I did with the last patch notes review, I'm going to make minor predictions about what you can kind of expect in your games going forward, and we're just going to dive right into it. So, right out of the gate here, adjustment to the game board. This is just lighting and shadow intensity tweaks so that it hopefully looks a little bit better. Sounds from combat occurring on the other player's boards can now be heard from yours, which is, again, interesting, but not really related to balance. So even though they said balance update, they're leading off with some general tweaks and fixes, and that's okay. New opponent selection logic. Now this actually does matter. This is in many ways a balance update. This is addressing the community feedback of fighting the same opponent over and over. And it didn't happen often, but it did happen. There were times where you would run into the same person just every round. Not the final round where there's just two of you where that should happen. I mean, sometimes, like for example, I was playing a game with some friends the other night and I ran into my buddy Ian like 3 out of 4 games in a row. And his particular squad was one that was countering mine. So like I was just getting pummeled in terms of my health total when I was very much in a position to beat other people, just not Ian. But because of the randomness of the opponent selection, I was just getting destroyed. So hopefully this will address that. I like this change. I'd like to see it be a little more round robin-ish, or at least moving in that general direction. So we'll, see how this goes. Mobile and PC performance optimizations, mobile fixed storage space calculation when downloading, okay. Fixed unit stats not reflecting all items and equipment when querying before combat started. So I believe that this is one of those things where if you click on your unit before combat begins, it'll show you like base values, and then after combat begins, if you click on your unit, you'll see updated stats. And hopefully this now means it will be reflected even before combat starts. And I think this is important because it kind of lets you know the value you're getting from your items, and then also things like the brawny passive, for example. So I believe it's forged in battle, right? Like you want to see how much health you're getting and whether or not it's worth keeping those units, blah, 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 blah. All right, so I like this change. Fixed friendly AI, not casting spells after Pudge hooked an enemy. I think this was just related to the way Pudge's hook works. After he hooks somebody, people that are nearby are supposed to start attacking that same target. It's like a focus fire mechanic, and I think this was interrupting them using abilities. So this is good. The Troll global item, coordinated assault, now stacks. This was one of the few global items that did not stack, so this brings it in line with the others, and I think this is good. AI will now cast spells on the ground under a target instead of on the target's location. Specifically, this is fixing what they call floating spells that happened if the spell was chasing somebody who happened to be in the air at the time. So think like assassins jumping, Tiny tossing somebody, and then a spell goes off targeting them. Sometimes you'll just have the effects of said spell floating in the air, right? This fixes that. It's a bug fix, basically. All right, Dragon Alliance. Now we're getting into like the real meat of the balance changes. And we kind of knew that a bunch of these were coming if you followed the Underlords Twitter, but Dragon Alliance now requires 2 units instead of all 3 dragons. And instead of what it used to do, the Dragon Alliance will now, if you meet the requirements, unlock an additional ability for the members of the Dragon Alliance. So for example, Dragon Knight, his fire breath is now his like base ability. And if you have the Alliance, he also has Dragon Form. So normally still has fire breath, but if you have the Alliance, also now has Dragon Form. The Dragon Form is that he transforms into a dragon at the start of the fight. Doesn't need mana to do it or anything. He's just auto-transformed, and he gets really cool dragon abilities. He's becoming one of 3. Specifically, they add poison on attacks and then sometimes do other things. It's not listed here in the patch notes, but I'm trying to give you the gloss over version. Dragon Knight's hit points are increased. I believe it used to be like 800, and the big one here is this 4,000. I believe that he did not have anywhere near 4,000 health at 3 stars. let's be honest, nobody was really getting Dragon Knight to 3 stars before anyway, because it was a pretty subpar unit, but at least now if you're attempting to go dragons because of the new buffs, there is a bit of a payoff there. He is now a chunky, meaty boy in the health department. Also gained plus 10 passive health regeneration, again helping with the tankiness, and you're going to see a theme as we kind of go throughout. But specifically knights, they're trying to make become more and more resilient. But I like that they started with them being weak and they're edging into this as opposed to them being incredibly like super strong, never dying, and then you have to like back down. So I do like this design path, but knights have been underperforming since the game launched, and they're slowly trying to get them into a good position where they are tanky but not unbeatable. So this kind of fits that theme. Puck has a new ability if you have the Dragon Alliance called Phase Shift. Does not list it here in the patch notes, but essentially what Phase Shift does is it's got a cooldown. I think it's like 6 seconds, 5 seconds, and 4 seconds depending on your star level, or it's something in that range. I don't remember the exact values, I apologize. But essentially, if he's about to take damage, he becomes immune for like half a second. So it's on a cooldown, so it's not like he's just permanently damage immune, but he can dodge some pretty impressive attacks. If he dodges like a Keeper of the Light ult, for example, with that, that's a pretty big deal. So this is also going to make Puck significantly more survivable. Doesn't really help him in the other department, which is just being kind of lackluster overall outside of that. But this is something that'll make Puck stick around. Viper, Dragon Alliance now unlocks Corrosive Skin. This is like a passive aura that does a damage over time and also slows the attack speed of people nearby, which is actually pretty decent on Viper. Other balance changes. Pocket Sand now also slows mana gained on receiving damage by 50%. Now, the wording here in the patch notes is a little weird, but it basically means that if you have an assassin and you have Pocket Sand and your assassin is damaging somebody, they only get half the mana they normally would from receiving damage. Because in Underlords, you gain mana from your own attacks and from when you take damage, but this reduces that by half because you're blinded, basically. Pocket Sand will also now debuff a random enemy unit within 2 cells if no units are within 1 cell of the assassin landing. So basically think of it as your assassin leaps to a target, but it has moved since your assassin has, went into the air. So if it lands and the original target's not next to it any longer, as long as there's something within 2 cells, you're going to get a benefit. So that's kind of nice. Keeper of the Light. Now, we knew this was going to be adjusted. Illuminate now costs 150 mana. Now, this is an interesting balance change because it doesn't actually address the damage. It just addresses the timing. So it used to cost 100. Now it's 150. So it's going to take, a little bit longer to get those horses to go off. But with things like Final Flash, for example, you could still theoretically get him to maybe cast it, but the problem with Final Flash is that it's going to reset his cooldown and give him full mana, but because it's a channeled spell, there's a strong chance that it just dies before it goes off. So this is interesting. Before, you could build mages and just be a glass cannon, and especially with Final Flash, you could just kind of trust that you are going to get one big explosion of damage if you could keep Keeper of Light alive long enough for Crystal Maiden to get the job done. Now you have to do a better job of protecting Keeper. He's not useless. I don't think he's been nerfed to the ground, but you have to do a better job of protecting him to make sure that he gets his ability off, and that'll be a challenge. And to make things even more difficult, the second half of the patch notes here for Keeper of the Light is his health has been decreased. And then here are the new values. So he is squishier and he takes longer. He is the epitome of Glass Cannon now. All right, other balance changes. Desperate Measure now also increases mana gained on receiving and dealing damage by the same amount as attack damage. So if you're not familiar, for every 5 health lost, you would get 1 bonus percent to your attack damage for all of your characters. That's what Desperate Measures did before. Now you also get mana gained as well. So essentially it makes Desperate Measures more attractive to the builds that care more about abilities than raw damage, right? Desperate Measures used to be one of those things that was really good for like hunters and maybe assassins, for example, but not great for mages. Now it's great for both. Wicked Intent. This is the passive ability, the passive item, if you will, that made it so that healing was blocked based on your number of heartless units. I keep wanting to say undead. I want to use old auto chest terminology, my apologies. Based on your heartless units, it would block their healing. Apparently that was only applying to healing effects and not things like regen. Now it also will block HP regen. Scrappy Alliance gets a little bit of a rework, and I find it to be rather interesting. It now provides 8 armor and 9 health regeneration, but it doubles that if your starting army is smaller in size than your opponent's. So this provides a potential way for you to focus on the Scrappy Alliance if you want to focus on your economy. So if you're not going to level as early or as often as your opponents, because you're going to be sitting on gold, you might be more rewarded for trying to go with a scrappy start now. It's an interesting mechanic, so we'll see how it plays out. I'm sure that you will see some people, trying that, but I like it. Knight Alliance now gives a constant 15, 25, or 35% damage reduction in addition to a 20, 25, and 30 when next to another knight. So in other words, for the knights, if you're next to a knight, you still get your bonus, but if you're not next to a knight, you still get some damage reduction. Now that's a pretty big deal because in many ways with the old Knight Alliance, you were strong when you were kind of holding your front line, but the minute one of your knights died, specifically like if you broke the chain, if you have 3 knights standing next to each other and you nuked the one in the middle, then the other 2 became super squishy because they lose all of their damage reduction. Now they do still lose damage reduction, but they also still have some passive damage reduction. So this is a buff to knights overall. It's going to start to, again, make them a bit more resilient. Also, speaking of buffs to knights, Chaos Knight damage increased. This is, reasonable damage increase across the board here. As you're kind of taking a look, it's somewhere between, 15 to 20 to like 30 or more damage per attack. That's solid. So Chaos Knight gets a damage buff. This is probably, if I'm being honest, just because when it comes to demons, Chaos Knight was far and away the worst. Not even just because he was a knight, but Queen of Pain is outstanding. You can almost slot her into any build. Shadow Fiend has been a mainstay in a couple of the builds thus far. Doom, because of his really good ability and his ability to slot in as a warrior, has been relevant. And Chaos Knight here had been just kind of garbage and was a knight on top of it, and they were underrepresented because they were basically just weak overall. So we've got some buffs to knights now. Hopefully Chaos Knight becomes an attractive demon, and hopefully the Knight Alliance will make the payoff worth it. We also, again, have buffs to Dragon Knight to make him more attractive. Yeah, they're trying. All right, final patch notes here. Boots of Speed, which was arguably one of, if not the worst item in the game, is now Tranquil Boots. Still gives the bonus to move speed, however, also adds 16 health regen. Okay. New item, excuse me. I almost called it Purple of Insight. Apparently I've been smoking the Pipe of Insight. Pipe of Insight. Plus 50% magic resistance. Once the first enemy has 100 mana, or 100% mana, because some characters actually don't have 100 mana, but 100% mana, apply a shield that blocks 400 magic damage to allies up to 1 cell away once per battle. This is really interesting because this is a toned down version of Black King Barb, BKB for short, but it applies it in a bubble, like to a group. So whether or not this will end up being better, it's kind of hard to tell because 400 magic damage isn't enough to mitigate some abilities, but it mitigates a lot. And applying this to a group is interesting, but it also doesn't make you magic immune fully. I don't know. It's nice that it's in the rotation, because if you weren't offered BKB before, being offered the Pipe of Insight is a good, you know, fallback choice, if you will. But if you're ever offered both of them, I think it's going to be kind of team comp dependent on whether you pick one over the other. If you're picking one of those late game team comps that wants to spread out, obviously BKB ends up just being better. If you're a corner based, like group up, protect one or two key units sort of thing, Pipe could actually end up being a better choice. I like the item. I like that it at least provides you with a meaningful decision to make. I'm a big fan of that. And then the last thing, and it's probably my favorite patch note, on mobile, it fixed Australia mode, which is some Android devices rendered the game upside down, and that has been fixed. So those are the notes. Now, the last time I did a patch note review, I also provided an analysis. That was the one when hunters were toned down, and I'd said that I think hunters would still be viable, but not broken OP. And with the changes to BKB at the time, that I had felt like you could expect to see mages show up more, because at the time I thought they were underrepresented and people were just scared of them because of BKB. And turns out that prediction was pretty spot on, because it's been a very mages-centric meta since then. So, that being said, I got it right last time. That means I will be way off base this time, but I'm still going to offer my opinion. And what you can expect, at least here in the early days, is you're going to likely expect to see a lot of people trying out both dragons and or knights, just because it's new, right? People like to try new things. I'm not sure that dragons are going to hold up long term. I think Dragon Knight's actually a pretty solid unit. But here's the problem with dragons right now. With the 3 units that exist, even if you only need 2 of them to unlock the next ability, none of them really synergize very well. Like, the closest one might be if you were trying to go Knights Assassins or something like that, but the problem is you don't typically want to run like Assassins and Mages, so you don't want Puck and Viper on the same team, because then you have no front line if you take that build. You could try to do Knights and Mages and use Knights as like your meat shield, but in the past, Knights have been pretty underwhelming. Now, they might be better now with the buffs, but are they going to be better than some of the other options to frontline for your mages? I don't know. So, and then even still, if you are doing the mages build, like, is it really worth it to potentially gimp yourself by running Knights and then also potentially gimp yourself by running Puck on top of it? Probably not. And then if you're thinking about like Knights and Assassins, so that maybe you get Dragon Knight and Viper, that doesn't feel really good. So I don't see that the dragon theme fits well in any of the combinations right now. I think that's the biggest knock against it, if I'm being honest. And none of the units, with the exception of maybe Dragon Knight, are good enough to just throw in for only the dragon bonus. Like, if you're maybe running an assassin build and you've got Viper already in it, and then late game, you know, maybe you're assassins and warriors, for example, and you've got your Kunkka and some other things, and throwing Dragon Knight in also gives you the human bonus, and then it also gives you the dragon bonus for Viper and Dragon Knight. Maybe like something like that works, but ultimately, while you're going to see people trying it in the early days after the patch, I don't think it's going to be a mainstay of the meta. Now, I do think you are going to see, at least slightly more frequently, Knights. I'm not sure, without testing, if the buffs are going to be enough to make the Knights viable as of right now. This is 2 patches in a row where they've received buffs, though, so they've got to be getting close. But I really suspect that the biggest issue with Knights right now is that I think that they work best with something like Trolls, and Trolls is already a pretty hard build to land. I like the new Troll global item stacking. Coordinated Assault now stacking is also a pretty big deal. But like if you can get Knights and Trolls together, that's a really good squad. You just don't see it very often because they're both kind of hard to assemble consistently because of trolls being so hard to find the 4th troll. If you could consistently find trolls and get to 4, I think you would definitely see a rise in that particular build. But that's, I think, the build that makes the most sense, because if you're going to go trolls, then you're already going to have your bat, and that's a knight as well, so you can kind of like build into it. Knights are like tanky but lack damage, but then if you get the passive from the trolls and you increase their attack speed, then suddenly they're attacking more, they're increasing their damage output. You add in, even if it's just one copy of something like Coordinated Assault, and you kind of create this like tight-packed squad, if you will, where everything is, knights making the other knights more resilient, and then they're all next to trolls that are increasing attack speed, and they're just this like phalanx of a unit. Like, there's some viability there. It just takes so much to assemble that you're not going to do it consistently. And for that reason, I don't think it's going to be like something you see defining a meta. You will see it win a couple of games, right? Like, I think you're going to see that sneak up on people and steal a game or two, because if it does fall your way, like if it just falls in your lap and you go for it and you can land it, I think it'll perform very, very well. I just don't see it happening consistently. So what I suspect from the meta, if I'm being entirely honest, is I think it's going to go back to a hunter meta, because I think that the glass cannon build of the mages will be delayed enough that hunters can shine. Hunters were already like the go-to kind of counter pick anyway. If you could get your Naga together for the magic resist, you could get Medusa and Tidehunter for the AoE stuns. You gave yourself a shot against mages. Now it's even more so a shot, because if it's going to take Keeper of Light longer to get the ult off, that means you're going to have more time to get your stuns to land. It was number 1, and then it fell slightly after the last patch to number 2, but it was still incredibly strong. And now with this round of balance changes, I don't see anything jumping out at me that says it won't be back to number 1 again, or at least at a minimum, it'll be something that routinely shows up. So you should expect it, and you should plan around at least 1, if not 2 people in your game are going to be trying to aggressively go hunters. So keep that in mind. Time will tell if I'm right or wrong. I don't imagine that I'm going to get all of these right when I do these patch note reviews, but right now, just based on what I'm seeing, I think that makes the most sense. So anyway, if you made it this far and you've listened to me ramble, I appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next video.